Well, this is my ride. I'll see you all again later. In space. It was a long journey, but I finally made it. Time to look around and see what I've got to work with here. I'll just pan out and... Oh god, no. Here we go again. Just like every playthrough I will ever do, we start out by building a quick route to generate some money. Last time, I decided to use monorails for the train network. They were horrendously expensive and required me to use planes instead of my usual passenger train money scheme. I have even loftier dreams for this map, so I'll need even more money to start, meaning it's time to spam some planes. There's not much you can do with a map of this size. Sure, it's a long way from end to end, but the width is really limiting. However, there is one crucial game mechanic I can take advantage of. Cargo payments in Transport Tycoon are based off the distance that cargo is shipped from pickup to delivery. Payments are negatively impacted by the amount of time that a shipment stays in transit. Therefore, faster transit equals more money. So, what if I make a route that delivers cargo from one end of the map to the other, and then choose the fastest train to ship it? This is what I'm setting out to do. Maglevs are the fastest engines available, but their speed comes at a huge expense. I'll need a lot of starting capital before I can do anything with trains. One measly plane route just won't cut it. I guess I'll add some more planes. There's definitely a balance to this. Though passengers and mail are both very profitable, the pay rate drops off pretty quickly over time. The payout for delivering cargo across the map is only slightly higher than shipping it halfway. Considering the time it takes to deliver, shipping across the map is actually less profitable. This likely will apply to trains as well, but building an absurd network is definitely worth it. With our planes providing fuel for the train fire, I think it's time to unveil the unholy beast that will be transporting our cargo around the world. This monster is 27 tiles long. It's too big to fit inside the window. The Chimera Maglev engine has what is probably the worst acceleration in the game proportional to its maximum speed. This fiend uses 9 of those engines, so hopefully it's enough. There's still a lot of infrastructure I have to build before I can let this demon roam free, but it's nice to look at for the time being. Also, this thing is incredibly expensive. At $2 million per train, I'll have to be making a lot more money than I am currently. Anyways, it's time to do some building. I should probably explain my plan for the network. I'll be transporting cargo back and forth from one end of the map to the other. I've decided that goods will be my cargo of choice for this long-haul adventure. Goods have the advantage of being produced by 3 separate industries which all accept different primary cargoes for inputs. They also have the highest payout per unit of any cargo, except for valuables which are way too difficult to collect in large quantities. All but 2 primary resources are involved in the production of goods, which is great because though this map seems huge, it's only twice the size of the map that I used in my Apollo playthrough. And just like that map, there's too much damned water here. Primary industries are not as common as I'd like them to be, so being able to utilize most of them is a huge bonus. There's tons of random industries blocking future expansion here. To raise morale, I'll set some dummy stations down next to each of them. If I leave these stations unserviced, it provides a higher chance that their industry goes bankrupt and disappears. I'll also buy up a bunch of land so new industries don't spawn in and get in the way. Usually, I try my best not to disturb the natural landscape or do some cheesy stuff like this, but I drop all of my rules on this map. From this point on, I'm at my absolute limit, no holds barred. The most evil feature of Maglevs is starting to rear its head. Their high speed comes at a far greater cost than any monetary value. In order to keep these trains at maximum speed, any curve in the track has to be equal or greater in length to that of the train. Since my trains are 27 tiles long, any curve or shift in the rails has to be 27 tiles long or more. That's enough to cause trouble on a normal map, but what I've got here is far from normal. It'll be a long time before I have to deal with any major effects, but it does make the entrances to these stations gigantic. With the station in the south complete, I can shift my focus to the north. It's pretty much the same process, except with even more water. Well, I did say I was going to disrupt the natural landscape today. I brushed this off last time, but you can save a lot of money terraforming water by using canals. Normally, raising land from water is ludicrously expensive, but if you buffer the water with canal tiles first, and then demolish the canal tiles, you can raise land at a fraction of the cost. Anyways, the north station is pretty much identical to the south, just mirrored to face the other direction. This becomes a common theme as I build on this map. I can test out designs in the south, and use what I learned there to build infrastructure in the north. With how demanding these trains are, I have to be sure that any rails I build are up to the task. There aren't many industries in the way here, but I'll buy up some land anyways. You'll see in due time just how annoying industries can be when they're blocking a path. Both maglev stations are finished, but there's not much I can do with them yet. I still have to connect the two stations together, but first, I should probably start producing some goods. In addition to the maglev rails shipping cargo across the map, I'll also need a separate network that feeds input cargo to the industries producing goods. Normally, I would combine these two networks into one, but maglev engines tend to misbehave when they have to share a network with other trains. Their horrendous acceleration makes it nearly impossible to keep the network densely populated. Instead, I'll be employing my old friend, the SH-40, for the feeder network. I've sung my praises time and time again for this magnificent creature. Good speed, acceleration, and it can handle a smaller turn radius. It's almost as good as the Kirby Paw. Now I can start hooking up some resources. I'll connect every industry on this half of the map as long as it can be turned into goods. Or so I thought, until I actually started extending the rail. After 5 minutes of building what is really some very simple track, I've only managed to make it around 1/10 the way to the center. And I thought I was going pretty quickly. These rails are essentially 2 straight lines. It was at this moment that I began regretting the decision to do this playthrough. Even after building out this route, I still have to do it another time when I connect the 2 maglev stations together. Well, there's no time like the present. To reduce the time it'll take to build all of this nonsense, I've decided to further pollute the landscape by means of egregious terraforming. The salmon population may never recover, but this network will be worth it. Trust me. I've made some decent progress here. I should probably connect some industries. If you service a primary industry, its production will grow over time. I need as many resources as I can, so these stations need to be built earlier rather than later. The very first farm station is complete. Get used to this design, because I have to build it 100 more times. Of course, I won't actually be building these all at once. I would like to get some trains running before the next century. Speaking of which, let's buy our first train. It does feel a little silly to build so much before getting any trains running, but it is the nature of this map. This plan requires a lot of setup before it's able to run at its full potential. I should probably place a factory down before these resources go to waste. This narrow strip of land was left empty for a reason, and now that purpose has been fulfilled. This is certainly a weird station layout. I thought it would be clever to reduce the footprint to be as narrow as possible, but the decisions I made to keep the design slim did more harm than good. These turnarounds have incredibly low throughput, and to compensate I had to build 3 of them. I'm not sure if a fully saturated line would ever need this many station platforms, but I had to build it wider to accommodate the shoddy turnarounds. Plus, these tunnels are just absurd. Though cool in theory, their only function is to further reduce the throughput. Now that goods are being produced, I can finally connect the maglev stations. The only thing standing between me and my transportation empire are 4,000 tiles of oceans and forests. I may be the first person to get a repeated stress injury from Transport Tycoon. The process of placing 2 lanes of rail, then panning the camera over for 20 minutes straight is pretty painful. At least I'll only have to do this once more when I add more lanes in the future. Hopefully that time isn't too soon. There's one last thing I still have to build before I can start adding maglev trains. The south station needs an overflow depot. Overflows act as a train buffer, so the waiting line for the station doesn't back up for miles when production is low. They also act as a good spot to add trains to. There's one last final thing I'll have to take care of before populating this network. There's many industries that produce goods, but all goods have the same destination. Goods must be delivered to an accepting city in order to receive a payment. I thought this whole process through ahead of time though, and left a large chunk of land behind both the southern and northern stations. At this time, only the south is producing goods, so I'll place a city in the north to accept them. If you're a long-time viewer, you may feel right at home in the great city of Chugtopia. Let's add some maglev trains! Not nearly as many as I was hoping for, but any amount is a good start. This area is looking positively messed up, but it's a temporary blemish. The land ownership signs will be removed over time as I expand these stations. Finally, the network has been set into motion. There's nowhere but up from here. And you may be thinking, isn't this a ring world? Why would you transport cargo all the way around the ring back to where you started? And you would be right in thinking that, but I'm taking the scenic route. Anyways, it's time to get back to building. For now, I'll continue connecting resources in the south and add to the variety of industries producing goods. Oil is a pretty good place to start. The only tangible benefit of generating a map with this much water is the sheer number of oil rigs that will spawn. Since I've decided that train life is more important than crawfish, making land bridges to access this bountiful oil supply is an easy task. And not only am I bolstering train life, but I'm also getting boats involved. You know, I've been having a fun time using boats recently. Ever since buoys became redundant with Update 14, they've become my go-to when dealing with inopportune terrain. Utilizing several modes of transport within the same area provides some very satisfying motion. Whoopsies, I almost forgot to place the oil refinery. That's 2 of the 3 goods producing industries I'll have to build here. All that's left now is a sawmill, but I'll handle that later. The pickup station is getting mighty full. I think it's time to add some more trains. There's a lot of rail between both ends of the map, so it'll be a long time before these rails are fully saturated. The major bottleneck at the moment is how quickly these industries can pump out goods. Each one of these maglev trains can hold just over 1,000 units of cargo, so these factories really have their work cut out for them. I think it's time to take what I've learned so far and expand the infrastructure in the north. Before I do anything with trains, I'd like to build up some roads for Chugtopia. I partitioned all of this space to be used by the city, so I'll make the most of it. I'll extend the road grid to fill up the entire area. As long as I'm providing adequate transportation services, supplying goods will heavily boost city growth. So, having ample roadside tiles will assure that all these new buildings will have a place. This is probably too many bus stations, but I'll let them stay for now. Alright, let's get back to building. I'll repeat the same design for the station feeding resources into the goods factories. I sure am thankful for the lack of industries here. The other half of the map has been pretty brutal when it comes to industries getting in the way. There's 2 power plants here, but luckily enough, they spawned in areas that are easy to work around. If you weren't aware, power plants are the only industry that never despawns. With the crucial infrastructure finished, I can really go wild and connect all the industries I want. There's a farm and a forest right next to each other here. This should be a good place to start. The feeder trains are 15 tiles long, so the stations don't have to be super complex to accommodate them. On their own, these trains have the capacity to hold several hundreds of cargo units, so each individual station won't be seeing very much traffic at all. As production increases, this may change, but I doubt it will ever outgrow the throughput of these stations. Since the north is now producing goods, I'll have to found another city in the south. I definitely wasn't thinking when I built these tracks here. They extend directly over the area where southern Chugtopia is supposed to sit. I guess I can settle for placing it in the bottom left corner instead. This whole area is going to be filled with roads anyways. I do my best to extend the roads and cover as much land as possible. These rails do get in the way, but it's nothing a tunnel system can't fix. Having this large of a city isn't really necessary at all, but it is fun to look at. The vital stations are all finished. Now I can turn my focus completely towards connecting more industries. Since there's a network on both ends of the map collecting resources, it seems logical to split the map down the center. Then I'll have a clean boundary telling me which network to connect each industry to. The Land Area Information tool is pretty useful for this kind of thing. I'll find the exact middle point of the map and draw a line to mark it. Time to connect some more industries. I'll connect a forest in the south to complete the trifecta of goods-producing industries. All of these primary stations get pretty samey. Forgive me if I skim over the building process. Now I've got a factory, sawmill, and oil refinery all producing goods. I've got free reign to connect almost any primary industry. In celebration, let's hook up some more oil rigs. I love using boats, but I really wish there was a larger selection. There's only 7 in total, and most of them are completely outclassed by newer models. By the end of the game, you're likely only using 3 out of the 7 available. For how many planes, trucks, and trains there are, it's sad to see boats lagging behind so much. And sure, I could use mods that add more boats, but one of my tenets for this channel is that I would stick to base game vehicles. Profits are soaring as our goods production continues to grow. We're making around 100 million per year now, which is already twice as much as any playthrough I've uploaded so far, and I'm just getting started. It should be said that making money in Transport Tycoon is really no challenge, provided you understand the basics. That being said, making absolute bales of cash with inflation disabled can actually be a logistical nightmare. Adding resources from this point on becomes a bit repetitive, so I'll skim over most of it. Building the same station a couple dozen times does not lend itself to interesting footage. I must say that connecting this many stations directly onto the main line will end in disaster, so let's fix that. So far, I've got 2 half networks feeding resources into the goods factories, but every time I add more resources, I build yet another junction onto the network. When I add more lanes to these networks, those junctions will grow exponentially in size. I have a solution in mind, but it will take some retooling. Instead of building 1 junction per station, I'll partition each half network into 4 sections. Then the stations within each section can all be connected into a sub-network that can be connected onto the main line using only 1 junction. This will save on building time and network complexity, and it also saves my sanity. Each half of the map has 2048 tiles, so I'll split them both evenly into 4 parts of 512. I'll place some markers down to make each segment easier to see. Topographically speaking, this reconfiguration isn't so different from the layouts that I normally build. It's just been spaghettified into a horrific noodle. Now to combine the stations within each map segment into a sideline. I've built quite a few stations already, but not enough to make this rework too difficult. Since these sidelines won't be housing as many trains as the main line, I can keep them single-laned and not worry too much about throughput. Plus, these longer trains have the side effect of increased lane density. If you compare a route with longer trains to one with trains that are shorter, there's a lot less empty space between the longer ones. However, this effect is greatly impacted by train acceleration. Our slower trains take very little time to accelerate to their maximum speed, whereas the maglev trains take forever. Later on, as these rails become more populated, this effect should become more obvious. I've refactored most of our stations, but some of them are a little too close to the ends of the map to operate on cleanly. There's very little space to combine them into a sideline, and even less space to fit a junction. I'll leave them be for now, but I will come back to fix it later. Now that I've got a system for grouping these industries, it's a lot easier to add them in bulk. All the industries within a segment can be added at the same time without any friction. Here's the part where I go absolutely bonkers connecting new industries in the south, and I won't stop until I've claimed everything on this half of the map. This does mean that I'll have to start adding new lanes soon, but I've got a pretty solid plan for that when it comes to pass. It may not seem like it, but this is really a lot of stations. Around 1 hour's worth. Maybe it's the Stockholm Syndrome, but building all of these stations is actually quite relaxing. I build the station platform, then the overflow, and finally the entrance and exit. Over and over. In the end, I've got around 30 new stations hooked up. Yippee! When I finally came to my senses, every industry on the south side of the map had been hooked up. This network is definitely a product of its environment. It may not be very interesting, but its functionality can only be fully realized on this type of map. The map view makes our progress more apparent. Half of the map has been completely pinkified. The maglev stations have been completely overran by the sheer amount of resources that are now being delivered, but who could have predicted that? I guess it's time to add some more trains! While I wait for the southern industries to grow, I'll start hooking up everything in the north. This process is pretty much identical to what I did in the south, so I won't dwell on it for too long. Although, I did find this double farm that generated naturally. I'm not sure how rare this sort of thing is, but personally, I've never seen anything like it. You know, I kinda wish I could have made this map even thinner. Ignoring the station hubs on either end, the densest areas on this map have tons of horizontal space left over. Unfortunately, there are no versions of Transport Tycoon that allow for a thinner map than this. I definitely should have made the map shorter. Sure, the building is easy, but the repetition makes actual gameplay pretty boring. Most of the playthrough is grinding through the menial stuff in order to get to the fun part. The City Mania client does have a copy and paste feature, but it doesn't work well with varied terrain. I know I've been pretty enthusiastic when it comes to terraforming this time around, but flattening the entire map for easier building is just not something that I'm willing to do. Hey, while I was yapping, all the menial stuff got finished. I guess it's time for the fun part. The map is looking absolutely absurd. There's rails going just about everywhere. You know, one of the main reasons I chose to do the Apollo playthrough was to set this one up as a sequel, and I originally only wanted to play this map so I could get these cool flyover shots. But this network actually ended up being pretty cool, or at least, a lot cooler than I was expecting. I've complained enough about the build process, but the dark times are over. Let's color some trains! As much as I like all of my trains being pink, color coding them based on their cargo is a lot more satisfying. I pointed out earlier that these stations were too close to the hub to connect cleanly. Well, let's connect them cleanly. I'll shift everything around to make space for a new junction to connect these stations. This whole area is kind of a mess though. In retrospect, I really should have just cut my losses and removed them, but hacking together a fix is pretty fun too. I'm not so happy with how this turned out, but I'll continue to mess with it until it's acceptable. Since I've connected all applicable industries to our goods factories, there's not much I can manually do to increase our output any further. I can, however, increase our station ratings so that resource production rises naturally over time. An industry's production rises or falls based on the rating of the station that serves it. There are many things you can do to increase station rating, such as employing faster trains or shipping a large amount of the cargo that the industry produces. You can also buy a statue in the town that owns the industry to further boost the rating by 10%. Since I'm servicing industries pretty much everywhere, I'll run through every town and buy a statue for each of them. The south stations are getting pretty active now. I think it's time to add some more lanes. I'll start by building a second station. Since I've mostly got these down to a science, I can copy and paste a large portion of the existing design. The terrain does end up getting in the way though. I wouldn't consider it a mistake to not have flattened all of this in the beginning, but these mountains do become an obstacle. Utilizing such long trains is definitely the mistake here. Now that I've built the second station, I can start running another lane through the feeder network. The full utility of this network layout is about to be realized. I've sectioned each half of the map into 4 parts, with each being served by a junction. Since a reasonably predictable amount of traffic will be splitting off from the main line onto each junction, I can use lane math to my advantage. At the moment, I can expect each segment to generate around 1/2 of one lane of traffic. Therefore, I should run this second lane through the first 2 junctions. Hopefully this all makes some kind of sense. This map certainly does not lend itself to easy explanations. Anyways, now that I'm supplying more resources, it's time to work on the maglev stations. I'd really like to avoid building this route several times, so I'll upgrade this to 3 lanes all at once. This does end up being a long-term process though. I'll build the stations at either ends of the map first, then run the new tracks across the map when everything is finished. These stations are quite easy to build after figuring out the initial design. It's really nice to see all the land that I claimed earlier slowly being filled up. Soon, all of these pink signs will be a distant memory, and in their place, a large station will sit, covering the entire width of this world. I would like to finish the maglev upgrade, but there are more pressing issues at hand, such as adding some more trains. Adding trains is easier than ever on this map. I can pan from one side to the other, checking every station and adding whatever trains I need in each of them. It also gives me time to check and make sure there's no jams like this one right here. I had the entrance and exit connected backwards. These trains must have been sitting here for a long time. It's an easy fix. Just swap the tracks and everything is working again. Since I've expanded the maglev station to its maximum size, I'll do the same for the feeder stations. Just like the maglev stations, these new platforms won't be utilized just yet. It's nice to have them ready though. I'm anticipating 4 lanes worth of trains by the time everything is finished, so I'll add 2 new sets of platforms. I did a lot of theory crafting before starting this run. Production had to be high enough to fill the map from side to side. However, I also had to make sure there was enough room for both the input and output stations. It's a bit of a balancing act to partition space in this way, and factoring in the length difference between the 2 classes of trains only makes it more challenging. In the end, we've got 4 feeder stations and 3 output stations. There's just too many factors impacting whether or not this ratio is correct, but I'm going solely on intuition. These tracks are really starting to bug me. I'd like to reclaim some land for Chugtopia, so I'll turn these surface rails into tunnels. Then I can run all the roads I want over this empty plot of land. My citizens are wondering why the ground is always shaking, but there's nothing to worry about. Well, I finished off all the infrastructure in the south, so let's do it all over again in the north. 3 maglev stations and 4 feeder stations. I was elated earlier about the lack of industries in the way here, but there's one industry I had forgotten. Banks can generate in cities, and though they are the smallest industry by far, this one manages to completely block my rails. I had this all measured out, only to be foiled by a building with a 2x1 footprint. Well, I can shift the rails around and make some space, but my soul is still damaged. Luckily, there was very little friction with the feeder stations. The 3 new platforms go down without any trouble. I must say, this is looking even better than the south. Seeing a station complex this big is really satisfying. Let's take a look at the map so far. It's kinda hard to see, but our pink fungus is slowly infecting this ring world. Both ends are completely filled at this point. It's been a while since I've checked the finances, but we're making just over $100 million per quarter. That's $400 million per year, almost half the way to $1 billion. Our cargo graphs are also pretty impressive. 70,000 units of cargo per quarter is nothing to scoff at, and it's nothing but up from here. Alright, these bus stations are starting to bug me too. Time to remove all of them. It would be great if there was a way to hide station titles without removing signs altogether. There are times where I like to use station platforms as scenery, but the titles end up breaking the immersion. There we go, that is looking much better. I've gone without naming these junctions up until now because of how repetitive they are. I try giving them names based on their position in the world, but I wouldn't say these names are very memorable. In this situation, maybe it's better to think of the networks as a whole as their own characters. Hey, let's add some more trains! The train count has been slowly growing and is now at 400. I wonder just how high we will go. There's a neat trick we can use to speed up these maglev stations. Normally, when a train reaches a station, it starts slowing down while entering the platform. With these maglevs being as long and as fast as they are, slowing down over crucial rails has a far larger impact on traffic flow. To circumvent this, I can place some waypoints at the very far end of the stations. If I tell these trains to first go to the waypoint and then go to the station, they will race through the platform without slowing down. This strategy adds a lot of throughput for how easy it is to set up. It also looks pretty ridiculous. These trains come barreling down at maximum speed towards the good citizens of Chugtopia, only to stop within 1 frame, then turn back around to their platform. These are the thrills of living in Chugtopia. The network is getting pretty busy now. I probably should start prepping for that maglev expansion. Since I'll finally be adding more lanes to the maglev network, I need to build lane balancers for the stations. I contemplated keeping each lane as its own separated network, seeing as these maglev trains are pretty bad with complex rails. But in the end, I figured that this was the more interesting decision. Actually, I take it back. This process was agonizing to say the least. Lane balancers allow trains the choice to swap lanes, and thus need the infrastructure to provide that choice. In short, each lane splits and then joins with the other available lanes. To ensure that trains don't block other trains, I have to employ some waiting bays. The only issue being that these trains are 27 tiles long, so the waiting bays have to match. The result is a monumentally long lane balancer that I'm not even sure is worth the trouble. Now it's time for the real nightmare. All of the new maglev infrastructure is finished, except for the 2 new lanes across the map. Alright, let's just get this over with. I mean, if everything goes right, this will be the last time I'll have to do this. Oh, and don't worry, industries get in the way here too. They aren't just an obstacle when building stations. Nope, they're an obstacle all the time. It doesn't help that each turn or shift in the rails has to be 27 tiles long. Every time I shift the rails to dodge an industry, it has to be a calculated route. Wow, I'm finally done. That only took forever. I'd say I've made a mark on this landscape, but hopefully the Ringworld can keep up with the ever-expanding infrastructure. You know what would make me happy right about now? Adding some more trains! I put a lot of effort into these maglev rails, so I want to get as much use as possible out of them. I'll need a lot more production if I want to fully satiate these new maglev upgrades, so now it's time to add even more lanes to the feeder networks. I built 4 stations for these networks, so I'll upgrade from 2 to 4 lanes. Surprisingly, this somehow ends up being less work than the whole maglev debacle. Since I'll have 4 lanes and have 4 segments of industries, each segment can be assumed to have 1 lane's worth of traffic. So, from the end to the center, each junction will strip the main line of 1 lane. Upgrading these junctions does require some brain power, but I'd rather do that than mindlessly place maglev rails for 4,000 miles. As I've done with everything so far, I'll start in the south and then take what I learned to the north. You know, maybe that thought process will end up screwing this map. If the southern half is full of experimental rails, it'll likely never perform as well as the north half. But really, it probably just comes down to the amount of industries that I connect though. These networks should have more than enough throughput to withstand anything that I throw at them. I think I've got a pretty good thing going here. Take the maglev and the electrified rail, then smash together those 2 different networks to create infinite imaginary money. As the train count reaches 500 and then 600, our profits skyrocket ever higher. I haven't tested it, but I suspect that some of these trains have the same issues that the Kirby Pauls had in their playthrough. The maglevs can easily make the round trip within a year's time, but the SH40s are probably too slow for theirs. This means that no matter what I do, a portion of these trains will always be unprofitable. It is a bit annoying as it throws off any accurate train counting, but it's not something that I can avoid on a map like this. I have to say, this map provides some very photogenic shots. There's tons of vehicle interaction, and these stations are absolutely bustling with activity. I know I've complained on and on about the tediousness of the building process, but I'm loving what I'm seeing here. This is definitely the most robotic form that a network can take, but it's alive in all the right places. We're now nearing 250 million per quarter. Wowza! I let all the new trains settle into their networks, and after a little while, our yearly profits finally top 1 billion. By the way, take a look at the train maintenance costs. It's only around 20 million, and with 600 trains utilizing thousands of engines in total. If you've seen my Kirby Paul playthrough, you may remember that half of our income was going towards train maintenance. It's only about 1/50th of our total income here. Just Kirby Paul things. I felt kind of bad that I hadn't utilized any logic circuits on this map, especially after their extreme usage in my previous video. I thought it would be cool if I made a network activity display that tracked how frequently maglev trains were shipping. Although, spoilers, it actually doesn't end up working. And I forgot to grab a safe prior to building, so this mistake is forever. It just goes to show that Transport Tycoon circuitry can be very challenging. Although I spent a lot of time coming up with this design, unforeseen factors ended up being too much trouble. I should have built this much sooner in the playthrough anyways. I have to say, these train circuits really have doohickey energy. Well, at least it looks cool. The general idea was to have a clock circuit that ticked every few seconds, which would check if a maglev train was passing through the center of the map. If a train did happen to pass by, it would send a dummy train into these chained waiting bays. Each waiting bay is then linked to a bar in this display, which would show a running average of network density. I think the issue arose with the frequency of maglevs passing by. If the maglevs passed by twice within one clock cycle, it would send 2 trains and jam up the waiting bays. With more time, I probably could have ironed this out and gotten it working. But as I spend more time working on this, industries grow out of control and I start lagging behind everywhere else. I've been cooking up a logic video that should be coming out sometime soon after this one, so look out for that if you want to see something that actually works. Let's add some more trains to raise my spirits. I have to admit, the failure of that circuit really took a lot out of me. Between that and building 100 copies of the same station, I think it's fair to say that I've been defeated by this map. Hey, 800 trains. That's a pretty huge amount for how long they are. If I had gone with shorter trains, we'd easily be clearing 2,000 right now, maybe even 3,000, but the network surely would have been suffering as a result. I'm not sure how much longer this ring world can hang on. It's handling way more trains than it was designed for. Let's take these last few moments to look over some truly absurd stats. We are transporting around 200,000 cargo units per quarter, a huge improvement from earlier. Our profits are a fair ways over $1 billion per year, but we already knew that. It should be said that shipping cargo at these distances is actually bad for profits. The CityMania website has a very cool profit calculator that shows the fall-off rate for cargo payments. The optimal distance for this train is around 2,000 tiles, and we're shipping over twice that distance. It's not exactly a huge impact, but we're missing out on about 10% of what's possible. There are over 70,000 rail tiles on this map. I haven't come anywhere close to that in any of my videos so far, and I likely won't in the future either. I guess doing laps around the longest possible map adds up. I would love to take this even further, but there's really no room left. The ultimate bottleneck is the number of industries and the throughput of the feeder network. And at this point, the feeder network is fully saturated. I can't expand it any further as there's absolutely no space left for new stations. I mean, look at this mess. Given the feeder stations are definitely too big. If I had planned better, I could have fit way more. But at this point, reworking every station to fix how inefficient the exits are would be way too much for me to handle. Well, I think it's about time to wrap this up. The superstructure can't handle this load for much longer. I need to make my escape fast. This thing could collapse any moment now. I'll see you all next time with a concept that's a little more grounded.